So, Nanda, you started in fintech before it was called fintech. I remember in 2008 or 9, New Yorker wrote this article about you where they talked about giving an identity to a billion people or more. I talked to a reporter at that time, and he said that couldn't be done. It's not possible. And now, 8 years, 9 years later, we have over a billion.
Yeah, 1.2 billion people.
1.2 billion people in Aadhar. So I read your recent article in Foreign Affairs where you said we are looking at this thing differently. We are thinking of identity as a public infrastructure issue, unlike what other countries and other people are thinking. Um, my question to you is this. When you started, this was a gigantic task for you. And now it's been done, but there are many things we have learned since that time. Knowing what you know today, if you were to do it again, what would you do differently?
Well, I think broadly the same. I think when we designed it way back in 2009, we took a lot of pains to design it in a minimalistic fashion. Privacy was built in by design. This platform was not an aggregator of data, it was just an ID provider.
Yeah.
And the data continued to reside in the respective application. So it would be banking data in the banking system, healthcare records in the healthcare system. So these are all very, very well thought through decisions, which are now proving to be very solid decisions. And we kept the data in the ID system to very minimal identifiers like name, address, date of birth, sex, and so on. I think some of the features which we introduced now, we had thought of earlier. For example, last year the government launched a concept called virtual ID, where somebody can create a revocable ID, attach it to the Aadhar number, use that in any transaction, so they never have to expose their Aadhar number. And the other thing is that the concept of tokenization, so that unless permitted by law, a database cannot store the Aadhar number, but has to store a tokenized or a sort of a variant of it, which you can't trace back to Aadhar. These were ideas which we had thought about in 2011, but at that time it was a little too advanced. The notion of tokenization and virtual ID was difficult at that time, so we were not able to push it through. That came later in 2011.
Okay. So this.
And that came later in 2017.
Right. So this also relates to the big issue that all of the world we are facing, which is privacy, how to think about privacy. Should we think about privacy as a private right? Should we think about privacy as a privilege or the right that is provided by governments?
Well, I think the Indian government, in fact, has this whole thing has played out in the Indian Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has held, and I agree with that, that privacy is a fundamental right. However, the court also has held that in certain situations, the state, in the public interest, may circumscribe that right, provided they have a law to justify, to sort of support that, whatever the action they're taking. And they've identified 4 different reasons for which they can do that. One is protection of revenue, protection of law and order, national security, and entitlements and benefits. So for these 4 things, if it's the law, you can, quote unquote, circumscribe the privacy. At the same time, whatever you do should be proportional to the objective and reasonable. So I think it's a very good framework that the Supreme Court has laid out. I think it's a brilliant framework. I completely endorse that. And parallelly, there's a proposed data privacy law, again, which I support. In fact, I wrote the letter to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh in May of 2010, saying that we should start thinking of data privacy laws. So it goes back 8 years. And then, of course, in the next few weeks, we will have the Aadhar judgment itself with the Supreme Court, which I'm quite sure will be supportive of Aadhar. So I think that sort of sets the whole thing to rest. I think I'm happy that Aadhar became the impetus for India to get a modern privacy infrastructure.
Right. So let me talk about the fears that people have. Anytime you create an infrastructure which is centralized, there's this fears of the surveillance state, the state having control of fundamentals like privacy. Are you worried about that?
Well, I think the lot of care has gone into the Aadhar design, and the Aadhar design it's not a data collection design. So it's not that the Aadhar system collects data, which is the first requirement of any surveillance is data collection. And so I don't.
They're surely collecting some data.
No, because that is collected. I mean, suppose somebody goes and opens a bank account. The banking system will use Aadhar to verify that you are the person you claim to be and do a KYC. But the bank account is opened in the banking system.
That's
And the Aadhar system doesn't know anything about it. It was just used as a service for authentication.
But don't they know where I live? Don't they
No. Well, no. You have some basic information in Aadhar, which is the name, address, date of birth, and sex, which is equally true of a voter ID card. And today, in fact, in India, the voter data is actually put out on the public internet. So, that level of data is probably ubiquitous in a voter ID card, driver's license, in a passport. So, it's certainly sensitive, but it's not the only place. So, Aadhar is not the only one that has that. I think, but the amount of thinking gone into the Aadhar design is substantially higher than most public systems. So, I don't see it as a surveillance instrument at all. In fact, surveillance is better done with your mobile phone.
Right, okay.